Grazie mille. That's the end of my Italian. So my friends know that I like to think I speak Italian, and I know 11 words, but I say each one with a lot of gusto. Now, first, I would like to thank you all for the very kind and warm reception. It's good to see some old friends from different parts of the world who've actually come. Some people have taken a plane from long, faraway places. People have come from Torino, another place from Rome. So thank you all for the really wonderful, warm reception. I'll be honest with you. I'm coming here from Geneva, from the United Nations Human Rights Council, and some of you who may have seen the appearances that I have there will know that when I walk in the room there, I get a very different kind of reception. So if looks could kill, I'd be dead 1,000 times. I've been there for 20 years, and I think no one has ever been more interrupted and cut off and targeted than me, unfortunately. Okay, so let me just say two things before we begin. First, it's really great to be here in the beautiful city of Milano, in the beautiful country of Italy. Great to be here. And I want to thank the organizers for 7 Ottobre, a very important organization. We're living in a very difficult time, not only for Israel and the Jews, but really for everyone. Very strange things are happening in our society. We don't know if we're being targeted by Chinese misinformation, maybe on TikTok, Russian corruption of politicians. Now we have the latest in Brussels. There's Russiagate, that Russia was bribing politicians and maybe journalists. We had last year Qatargate, where Qatar was paying off members of the European Parliament. So we're in a strange time where dictatorships and human rights abusers are trying to infiltrate in certain ways our political system and our public opinion. It's a very strange time, and we see these movements popping up in our universities that seem to be attacking some of the foundations of our democratic society. It's a very difficult time. I'm here to talk about how the United Nations plays into this. And as you know, I'm directing an organization, UN Watch, that monitors the United Nations, that tries to speak out for human rights, that is opposing anti-Semitism. And I'll share with you some of my thoughts on how things have been going when it comes to these subjects in the past several months, the past year. So, you know, when October 7th happened, there were a few world leaders who immediately responded to acknowledge the barbarism that had taken place. President Biden famously spoke about an evil that has been unleashed upon the world. Prime Minister Sunak from England said that, spoke about the pogrom that had taken place on that day. And, you know, at the United Nations, we recently marked and celebrated the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And in that document, adopted in 1948, December 10th, 1948, in the Palais de Chaillot in Paris. I don't think AI can translate Palais de Chaillot, but it was a special meeting of the General Assembly in Paris. They adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, speaking about the rights of equality and freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the right to life, and other basic freedoms. And that document was adopted in 1948. That's a few years after the Holocaust, and that's not an accident. In the preamble of the declaration, it is written, this declaration is being adopted, I quote, in response to barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind. Barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind. That was the motivation. The Nazi atrocities that motivated the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So we have a right to expect that the United Nations, the guardian of the Universal Declaration, would be at the forefront in responding to barbarous acts which took place in our time, perhaps one of the worst terrorist attacks in modern times, mass rape, murder of 1,200 people in one day, horrific atrocities done before family members, terrible things. But sadly, too many leading United Nations officials and United Nations agencies and organs failed to speak clearly about what had taken place, even the opposite. For example, most famously, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, gave a speech several months ago where he said, yeah, I condemn what Hamas did, but he said, we must, of course, remember that nothing takes place, nothing happens in a vacuum. Nothing happens in a vacuum, and he went on to enumerate numerous supposed Palestinian grievances against Israel, one after the other and the other. In effect, he was justifying what Hamas did. Nothing happens in a vacuum. Of course, he wasn't completely wrong, because nothing we do ever happens in a vacuum. We're all influenced by our families, our community, our education. He might have asked, nothing happens in a vacuum. What schools did the 3,000 terrorists who invaded Israel and massacred families, what schools did they go to? And had he brought some introspection, he would have acknowledged that the vast majority, maybe 90% of them, according to a UN official, went to UNRWA schools, to United Nations schools. The terrorists went to United Nations schools. Why is our money? Because it's the Western world that is paying for an agency that sadly, for 75 years, has been teaching young Palestinians, year after year, generation after generation, that your home is not here in Gaza. You know, Gaza is actually a very beautiful beach. I was there many years ago, and we gave them billions of dollars. They could have built up like Dubai, which builds up and looks to the future, but instead they took the money and they built down. They took the cement given to build homes, hospitals, and schools, and they used that cement to build terror tunnels, because they were told by UNRWA for generations that your home is not here in Gaza. You can see a video. The teacher asks the young student who's 10 years old, is your home here in Gaza? La. Where's your home? Jaffa, Akka, Haifa. They are told your home is in Israel, and the way you get it is the right of return, which for them means dismantling Israel. You can see video, little children, 5 years old, holding guns, fake guns, saying, right of return, right of return. So the UN, the right of return, a human right. No, there's no right to dismantle Israel. So all the money we gave to Gaza, the Western world, could have gone to build a beautiful place in Gaza. It could have been Tel Aviv 2.0. It's barely an hour from Tel Aviv. It's the same beach. Beautiful beaches, even nicer. Could have built Dubai, could have built Nice. But they're told by UNRWA that your home is not here, your home is there. And so they built hundreds of kilometers of terror tunnels. This was the project of UNRWA. Okay, that's the Secretary General. We can look at, and he set a tone, sadly. And he's not someone who was the most anti-Israel person. He was never very balanced. If you agree to become the head of that organization, which has, who are the shareholders? 56 countries are Muslim countries: Iran, Syria, Pakistan, Libya, and so on. So, of course, when you become head of that organization, you know who the shareholders are, and you will not get a Secretary General who is very balanced. But sadly, since October 7th, it got much worse. Very sad to see. We can look at the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros, who was very close with China. You know, during the coronavirus, he didn't want to disagree with China, whatever China was telling him. They supported his campaign to become director. He is routinely, the head of the health organization, World Health, routinely condemning Israel for allegedly attacking hospitals. What he doesn't say is that Hamas has made hospitals one of their main headquarters. Every hospital in Gaza has somewhere in there with terrorists hiding there. The Hamas terrorists are violating the Geneva Convention's international humanitarian law by exploiting, abusing a protected space of a hospital. They are putting at risk the patients in the hospital, the civilians in the area. Israel has to remove the terrorists. He should be speaking the truth and condemning Hamas. He should be condemning the arsonist, not the firefighter. The one who's lighting the fire, not the one who's putting out the fire. That's the World Health Organization. And then let's come, since we're still in Geneva, we have the UN Human Rights Council. It sounds very nice. The United Nations Human Rights Council. Most people here in Europe, even in my original country, Canada, I live in Switzerland, but originally in Canada, when you say to most people, the United Nations Human Rights Council, they imagine wise men with long white beards, dressed in white robes, strolling along Mount Olympus, making their decisions based on facts, logic, and morality. When nothing could be further from the truth. When those sitting around the table in Geneva, across the street from me at the United Nations Human Rights Council, are not Plato, Socrates, or Aristotle, but for many years, Colonel Gaddafi of Libya, who was chair in 2003, the Chinese communist regime, always on the Human Rights Council, the Cuban dictatorship of Fidel Castro and his successors, always on the Human Rights Council. Today, the members include current members: China, Cuba, Qatar, Kazakhstan, Vietnam, Russia. Putin was always a member. We led the campaign to expel Russia. Only when he invaded Ukraine, it worked. America did it, and everyone voted. Enough voted. Venezuela, always a member up until a year or two ago. Chavez, Maduro, Venezuela. 7 million people fled the country because it collapsed. And we have some people from Latin America. They know very well what's happening in Venezuela. A regular member, a judge of human rights for the world. So, our organization tries to give a voice to the voiceless. When the dictators, the human rights abusers, the murderers are elected to top bodies, and I didn't mention, of course, in October, they elected the Islamic regime in Iran to be chair of the United Nations Human Rights Council Social Forum. The Human Rights Council Social Forum, Islamic regime of Iran, which is beating, blinding, poisoning, gassing, arresting, raping, torturing their own people. Women who rose up to demand women life freedom, and the men who joined them, who put their lives at risk, hundreds were massacred, thousands were arrested, maybe 20,000 were arrested. People are being executed. A rapper, a musician, Tumaj, is sentenced to death. We're calling for his release. This is the Islamic regime in Iran. Our organization, UN Watch, organizes every year the Geneva Summit for Human Rights and Democracy. We just organized the 16th annual Summit for Human Rights and Democracy. We bring the victims. When China, Cuba, Iran are sitting in the seats as the judges of human rights, we bring their victims to speak to Geneva inside the United Nations. We just brought Rui Cha, who is a Chinese woman, young woman, very young woman, who stood up in Shanghai and did this. A white paper. She lifted the white paper. She was part of the white paper protest movement. They took her away right away, threw her in solitary confinement. She was thrown in prison, suffering. We brought her to speak. China sits there as a judge of human rights. We brought Rui Cha. She came and lifted up the white paper. That white paper was a mirror for the dictatorship. Let them see who they really are. And, we may ask, China is 1.5 billion people. A fifth of humanity denied any freedom. No freedom of speech, no freedom of religion, no freedom of assembly. The Dr. Li Wenliang, who spoke about the coronavirus in Wuhan, he warned the world They took him away in the middle of the night. He was gone. He was dead days later. The people in Hong Kong who had a beacon of freedom and democracy, it's extinguished. Tibetans, thousands of temples destroyed. You would think the United Nations Human Rights Council would speak for China. In the full history of the council, since 2006, so we're now 18 years, there has not been a single resolution, not one, on the UN, on China, at the UN Human Rights Council. Not one resolution. Instead, the vast majority are against Israel. In fact, there are more resolutions against Israel than on Iran, Syria, and North Korea combined. More resolutions on Israel than any other country. There are 2 agenda items. We're going to begin in Geneva in about a week or 2 weeks. There's going to be another meeting of the UN Human Rights Council. One day, one agenda item is on the world, human rights situations around the world for 193 countries. Another day, a special agenda item called human rights violations in occupied Arab territories, including Palestine, meaning Israel. One agenda item for the whole world, one against Israel alone. No other country, not Syria, where they are barrel bombing hospitals, where he's killed 500,000 of his own people, Assad, no agenda item. Not North Korea, one of the most horrific places on the planet, which sits across the street at the World Health Organization Executive Board. Elected last year to the executive board, the worst health system on the planet. And they pay, the UN is paying business class flights for the North Korean regime to send people to Geneva to attend these meetings. Not Russia, which is murdering innocent people in Ukraine. There's no agenda item on any of these countries, only Israel every meeting. So this is the reality. We held a real summit on human rights. We had, for many years, she just stepped down to spend time with her family, an amazing Shayla, our organizer. Are Shayla's parents here? Do I see Shayla's parents here in the audience somewhere? Can you clap if you're here? Shayla's parents? I think they're here somewhere. But I want to thank Shayla Raqqa, who was our organizer, and to thank her parents, who I think are somewhere here. So it's an amazing event, and we bring Uyghurs. We brought the Uyghur Muslims. You know, 1 million or 2 million Uyghur Muslims are put in camps. They are persecuted. According to many countries, it's genocide against the Uyghur Muslims. Never a single resolution. How come the Human Rights Council, if they care about human rights, don't do one resolution for 1.5 billion people? If, you say, the activists on university campuses, if they care about human rights, why don't they go protest in every Walmart store? If you go into a Walmart store in America, and I'm sure here in Europe, in different stores, 90% of the products are made in China. Does anyone protest this? I don't see any universities caring about what happens in China. You could say, well, many of the protesters are Muslims. They care about their Muslim brothers. Really? They care about their Muslim brothers? For more than 10 years, I am bringing, with UN Watch and our coalition of 25 human rights groups, we are bringing Uyghur Muslims to speak about what they've been doing to them. I've never seen one student group in the world, other than the very select groups that care about Uyghurs or very small groups, but all these campus students, I've never seen one of them do an occupation of a university in Milano or Geneva, which they just did, to speak out for the millions of Muslim Uyghurs who have their beards cut off, who are forced to eat pork, and to crush their language and crush their religion. So we brought Abduweli Ayub, who was thrown into prison because he was defending his language and culture. So that's what we're facing at the Human Rights Council. And of course, Iran, we brought Dr. Kylie Moore Gilbert, an Australian scholar thrown into prison as a hostage. Iran takes hostages just like Hamas, their client, does. Okay. Speaking about the Human Rights Council, I have to share something here in Italy about someone named, you may have heard of her, Francesca Albanese. Have you heard of her? Francesca Albanese. When she is the UN expert, the UN investigator, the special rapporteur on Palestine. Sadly, she's from Italy, but we know tonight there are many good people here who care about real human rights. Real human rights. Not the rights of Hamas, not the rights of terrorists. When she was nominated 2 years ago, we went to the council. We gave them a dossier, and we said, you are about to appoint someone who is the opposite of what an expert is supposed to be. Your rules at the United Nations say the expert must be objective. She is the opposite of objective when it comes to Palestinian-Israel issues. You couldn't find a single person in the world who is less objective and impartial than Francesca Albanese. And we gave them the documents and the facts. The fact that 10 years ago she wrote a Facebook post. She said, give money to UNRWA. She used to work for UNRWA. Give money to UNRWA. And she said, you know, in America, America is subjugated by the Jewish lobby. America is subjugated by the Jewish lobby. Not Zionism, America subjugated by the Jewish lobby. Overt anti-Semitism. She wrote this in public to raise money for UNRWA. And now she says she didn't mean it, she meant something else, she meant the Israel lobby. Let's trust people what they say. And we gave the UN the examples where for years she's been comparing Israelis to Nazis, where her husband did work for the PLO as an advisor. She didn't mention this on her application. They said, are you impartial? Yes. Any conflicts of interest? No. Really? No? Your husband worked for the Palestinian Authority? You don't say it. Anything in your background that might make you seem not objective? No, no. Unbelievable. But they appointed her, and then as expert, she went on to speak at a Hamas conference by video. She said, you have the right to resist. So a UN expert is telling a Hamas conference, you can see it on video, you have the right to resist. And she is justifying what October 7th, President Macron of France said this was the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, an obvious truth. She said no. She said it's not against Jews, it's against Israeli oppression. And then she got condemned, the first UN expert in history to be condemned by France and to be condemned by Germany. No other UN expert in history. So that's Francesca Albanese. A few other things about her very briefly. We revealed that she had a recent trip. She went to Australia in November. It was a bit of a strange trip because UN expert on a region, if you're the UN expert on Sudan, you go to Sudan. If you're the UN expert on Haiti, you go to Haiti. The UN expert on Palestine, she goes to Australia. She goes to New Zealand. They're great countries. I'd love to go too. Maybe someone will sponsor me, but she got sponsored. According to the Australian, I'll give you the precise name of the group. It's called AFOPA, Australian Friends of Palestine. They said we sponsored her visit to give the lecture. So a UN expert is not supposed to be sponsored by an outside group. It's in the rules, the code of conduct. And we filed a complaint just this week to the United Nations, Guterres. We said, here are these pro-Palestine, pro-Hamas lobby groups in Australia saying they sponsored her trip, they supported her trip. She's not supposed to take the money. So she said, no, the UN paid for it. The UN paid for it. Okay, the UN paid for it. Well, we looked at the list of UN visits for last year. She went in November 2023. And on the 2023 list of official UN visits, it's not listed. So maybe it wasn't an official UN visit. And if the UN did pay for it, why is the UN paying for the expert on Palestine to be flying to Australia, to give speeches for lobby groups, to go in New Zealand and to lobby a pension fund to divest from Israel? Is this what a UN investigator is supposed to do? It makes no sense. So we asked, can you please disclose, like any member of parliament, release your expenses? That's all we asked. Today, just now, because she knew I would be here and speaking before journalists who are here, and I met today, she said, oh, no, everything I did is fine, and everything is fine. We also revealed one other thing, which you may know about, because you know about her, is, and I'll finish in just a few minutes, a funny story happened about 2 weeks ago. There was an account on Twitter that's called Rabbi Linda Goldstein. Rabbi Linda Goldstein, it's a parody account, a satire account. It's Linda Goldstein says she's the chief rabbi of Gaza. There are no Jews in Gaza, okay? There were up until 2005. chief rabbi of Gaza, and she's anti-Zionist. So join me, I'm a progressive anti-Zionist, I'm a rabbi who hates Israel. That's the satire parody account. Okay, but the account, the person who runs it, sent a letter, an email, to Albanese's office and said, please come to Columbia University. We have the Intifada at Columbia. Please come, please speak. And her office, her assistant answers, great, bravo, we want to come. And the office says, you said there'll be a payment, honorarium. How much? How much money you're going to pay? Because she's not allowed to accept, but you could send the money to me. I will send you an invoice. You send the money to me. So what a UN official cannot do directly to give a lecture for money, she cannot do indirectly by sending it to her assistant, Sarah Troyan, who I think is also Italian, but living in the Netherlands, and she's going to get an invoice. So we asked, if everything is kosher, if everything is good, I asked her now, moments ago, I wrote to her on Twitter, just release the information. Then if I'm wrong and I'm lying, release the information. Number one, all your expenses, who paid for it? The group that said they sponsored, the UN, release the information. So far, nothing. And if you're not taking payments, release the information about this institute that's giving invoices. So that is what we're demanding, is full disclosure. It's time for UN officials who support Hamas to be held to account. I will just wrap up by saying one more thing. I promised yesterday to make a revelation. I don't have much time, but just make one revelation. Francesca Albanese, not so well known, is leading a global network of anti-Israel officials, people who used to work for UNRWA, professors, about 50 of these people around the world, figuring out various ways to use law to attack Israel, to use the UN to attack Israel. They put out a document, which I obtained on the internet, which is a plan on how to get countries to give money to UNRWA, countries that froze their money. And she says, her friends, they put a document, a strategy. You need to send messages in Europe to how to convince people to give money. And one of her messages is, she says, tell countries, the governments, especially in Europe, the right-wing governments, tell them, if you don't give money to UNRWA, then the Arabs, the Palestinians, they're all going to come to Europe. 6 million, they're all going to come to Europe. So tell the right-wing governments they have to give money. Otherwise, they're all going to show up here. So what a cynical manipulation of public opinion, of lawmakers. And this was a strategy they developed to convince governments, among other things, to fund UNRWA. I'm just going to sum up by saying that what we're up against is very challenging. It's not only at the UN, as we'll hear. You know, on October 17th, the whole world had the headline, Israel bombs hospital, kills 500 people. The whole story was false. It wasn't Israel. It was the jihad that fired the rocket. It wasn't the hospital. It was the parking lot. They didn't kill 500 people. It was maybe 10, maybe 50. We don't know. It was all a lie. But the whole world, New York Times, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and of course, Albanese and the others, they all went with the story. It means that in the world, leading institutions want that story. They want that story. Israel kills innocent people. And here in Europe, we recall some of the history. When people were dying of the Black Plague, they said it's the Jews who poisoned the wells. This was all over here in Europe. So we're up against something very strong, but it's amazing to see the people here, and we're resolved to fight back against the enemies of human rights, the enemies of democracy, those who support terrorism. We're not going to give up. We're going to hold people like Albanese, Francesca to account, and with your help, we shall prevail. Thank you very much.